My name is Savannah. I am 33 years old, and I am the founder of a massive private equity firm. But my family did not know that. Can you believe she still rents a tiny apartment at her age? She cannot even afford a house. My sister Brittany laughed at our recent family gathering surrounded by my parents who nodded in agreement. I took a slow sip of my wine, smiled directly at them, and said, I do not own a house. I own the entire luxury building you all currently live in. The room went completely silent. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. To understand how I ended up owning my family's entire existence, we have to go back 5 years to a night that shattered my world. Two heavy black trash bags sat on the flooded lawn containing every single item I owned. The freezing rain lashed against my face, soaking through my thin jacket, but I could not look away from the reinforced glass doors of my childhood home. Inside, safe and dry and brilliantly lit, my mother, Patricia, was carefully polishing a brand new ornate makeup vanity. My father, Richard, laughed as he helped guide it right into the bedroom I had slept in since I was a little girl. They were so happy. They looked like a picture-perfect family remodeling their home. You would never guess that just 30 minutes earlier, they had thrown their eldest daughter out into a torrential downpour. My chest tightened as the memory of the argument replayed in my mind. I had come home exhausted from a grueling 12-hour shift at the accounting firm where I worked. I walked into the living room and froze. My sister Brittany, the undisputed golden child of the family, was sitting on the sofa surrounded by paint swatches and baby catalogs. Her fiancé Trey, an arrogant African-American crypto investor who always wore custom suits that cost more than my car, was lounging beside her. Savannah, good you are home, my mother Patricia had said, not looking up from a fabric sample. We are moving your things to the basement storage. Brittany needs your bedroom. I stared at her, the exhaustion instantly replaced by confusion. My bedroom, why? Brittany sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes as if I were a slow child. Because Trey and I are expecting, obviously. We need a massive nursery. Your room gets the best natural light, and it connects perfectly to the guest room, which will become Trey's new office. You are 28 years old, Savannah. It is time to stop being so incredibly selfish and think about the family. Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. Selfish, I asked, my voice rising. I pay half the mortgage on this house, Brittany. I have been covering the utility bills and the property taxes for the last 2 years because Dad's business was struggling. You and Trey do not even pay for your own groceries, and you want to kick me out of my room. Keep your voice down, my father. Richard snapped, entering the room with a scowl. Your sister is pregnant. She needs a stress-free environment. And for your information, the money you give us is rent. This is my house. You do not get to dictate who sleeps where. Rent. I was practically shaking. You told me we were in this together. You told me the $5,000 I gave you last month was to save this house from foreclosure. And we are very grateful, Patricia chimed in, her tone dripping with false sweetness. But you have to understand the hierarchy of needs here. Brittany is starting a family. Trey is on the verge of a massive cryptocurrency breakthrough. They need the space to build their future. You are single, you work a boring accounting job, and you barely spend time at home anyway. You can easily make do with the basement. The basement floods, I reminded them, desperation creeping into my voice. It is covered in black mold. I cannot live down there. Then find an apartment, Brittany said, examining her manicured nails. Though with your salary you will probably end up in a terrible neighborhood. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to correct her, to defend me. But they just stood there, their silence a deafening endorsement of her cruelty. I am not moving to the basement, I stated firmly, standing my ground. And I am not leaving. I have a right to be here. Richard's face turned completely red. He marched up to me, pointing a thick finger inches from my nose. You have zero rights in my house. You have always been stubborn and ungrateful. If you cannot support your pregnant sister and respect our rules, then you can pack your bags right now. It is pouring rain outside. I pleaded, tears finally spilling over. Where am I supposed to go at 11 o'clock at night? My father looked me dead in the eyes, completely devoid of any parental warmth. Go live in the streets for all I care. Maybe it will teach you some humility. Before I could even process the rejection, Patricia was handing me 2 garbage bags and physically pushing me toward the front door. The lock clicked shut behind me, echoing like a gunshot in the stormy night. So there I was, standing in the freezing rain, watching my family replace my existence with a makeup vanity. The cold water seeped through my shoes, but a different kind of cold was settling into my bones. For my entire life, I had played the dutiful daughter. I had worked hard, saved my money, and bailed my parents out when they mismanaged their finances. I had accepted the hand-me-downs while Brittany got the designer dresses. I had tolerated their blatant favoritism. But standing on that flooded lawn, the last lingering thread of family loyalty snapped. I wiped the mixture of rain and tears from my face, picked up my 2 trash bags, and turned my back on the house. They thought they had discarded a weak, pathetic woman who would come crawling back to beg for a spot in their moldy basement. They were wrong. I was not going to break. I was going to build. And I was going to make sure that the next time we crossed paths, I would be the one holding all the power. I dragged the heavy trash bags across the flooded lawn, my feet sinking into the freezing mud. The cold rain was relentless, soaking through my thin jacket. Adrenaline kept me moving. I needed to get to my car. My beat-up Honda Civic was parked at the end of the driveway. It had a working heater. I could sleep in the back seat tonight and figure out a plan tomorrow. But as I rounded the corner of the house, my heart sank. Blocking my car completely from the street was a massive, brand-new Ford F-150. It belonged to Trey. The truck was gleaming in the rain, a monument to his inflated ego and my parents' terrible financial decisions. They had co-signed the loan for that truck 3 months ago because Trey claimed he needed a luxury vehicle to attract cryptocurrency clients. He had not made a single payment since. I looked up at the covered porch. Trey was standing there under the dry awning, casually smoking a cigarette. He was wearing a designer silk robe, watching me struggle with a smirk playing on his lips. "Move your truck, Trey," I demanded, my teeth chattering. "I need to get my car out." Trey took a slow drag and exhaled a thick cloud of smoke. "Cannot do it, Savannah," he drawled, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I already had a couple of drinks celebrating the new nursery. I am in no condition to drive. You know how it is." "Hand me the keys," then I snapped, dropping a bag onto the wet pavement. "I will back it out myself," he chuckled, a low, grating sound. "Yeah, I do not think so. You are not insured on this beauty. Besides, I do not want your muddy clothes ruining the leather interior. Just call an Uber like a normal person. Assuming you can afford one, of course." He was doing this on purpose. He wanted to see me walk in the rain. "Move the truck," I said, my voice dropping dangerously low. Trey flicked his cigarette stub into a puddle near my feet. "Or what? You will complain to Richard and Patricia. Go ahead." "Oh wait, they just kicked you out. Looks like you are walking tonight. Have a safe trip." He turned around, walked inside the warm house and locked the door. I stood alone in the driveway, the freezing rain beating down on me. Anger flared in my chest, but I pushed it down. Survival was all that mattered now. I grabbed the soaking trash bags and began the long walk down the street. The nearest commercial area was a convenience store a mile away. Every step was sheer agony. My arms burned from the weight of my entire life stuffed into cheap plastic. Passing cars splashed freezing water onto my jeans, and the streetlights cast distorted shadows on the pavement. I felt my sneakers filling with icy mud, making my feet numb. By the time I saw the flickering neon sign of the convenience store piercing the darkness, I was shivering uncontrollably. I dragged my bags under the small metal awning near the ice machine, finding a tiny patch of dry concrete. My fingers were stiff and clumsy as I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. I opened my ride-sharing app, typed in the address of a cheap motel, and hit request. I watched the screen load, desperate for confirmation that a warm car was on its way. Instead, a harsh red banner popped up on the screen. "Payment declined. Please update your billing method." I frowned, wiping rainwater from the screen. That had to be a glitch. I had just gotten paid 2 days ago. I hit request again. Payment declined. A cold knot of panic formed in my stomach. I switched over to my mobile banking app. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone twice before I could log in. The screen loaded. I stared at the numbers, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Available balance $12.50. I hit refresh. The screen reloaded, but the numbers stayed exactly the same. My breathing turned shallow and frantic. No, that is impossible. I had $15,000 in that account, $15,000 of hard-earned savings. Money I had saved by skipping lunches, picking up extra shifts, and denying myself basic luxuries. That money was my escape plan. It was my safety net. It was supposed to be the down payment on my own apartment so I could leave my toxic family behind. I frantically clicked into the transaction history, my eyes scanning the recent activity. Right at the top of the list, initiated just 4 hours earlier, was a massive transfer. The entire balance of $15,000 had been moved out of my account in a single transaction. I stared at the destination account name. It was my mother's personal checking account. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The account I used for my savings was a legacy joint account. Patricia had set it up with me when I was 16 years old, back when I got my first job. Because I had been working nonstop ever since, I never bothered to open a private account. I trusted my own mother. Under banking laws, any primary account holder has the legal right to withdraw funds without notifying the other party. She had legal access to every penny I earned. I tapped on the transaction details, my vision blurring, as tears of pure rage flooded my eyes. There at the bottom of the screen was an optional memo line that the sender had filled out. It read, "Nursery Furniture Fund." Patricia had not just kicked me out into the freezing rain. She had robbed me blind to do it. She had stolen my entire life savings just to buy a fancy crib and an ornate makeup vanity for Brittany. They knew exactly what they were doing. They blocked my car so I could not sleep in it. They drained my bank account so I could not rent a room. They wanted me destitute. They wanted me broken. They wanted to ensure I truly had to go live in the streets just like my father commanded. I leaned back against the brick wall of the convenience store, the icy air burning my lungs. I had exactly $12.50 to my name. I had no car. I had no home. I had nothing but 2 garbage bags of wet clothes. But as I stood there shivering in the dark, the despair suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, sharp, and terrifying clarity. My family had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They thought stripping me of my money would make me powerless. They had no idea it was the exact catalyst I needed to destroy them. I pulled up the keypad on my cracked screen and dialed my mother's number. My fingers were stiff from the freezing rain, but anger made my movements precise. The phone rang twice before she answered. I could hear the faint sound of jazz music playing in the background mixed with the clinking of wine glasses. They were celebrating my eviction. "I know why you are calling, Savannah," my mother said. Her voice was perfectly calm, entirely devoid of guilt. "Do not make a scene." "You stole $15,000 from me," I said, my voice dangerously low. "That was every penny I had to my name. You knew I was planning to use that to get my own apartment." "Do not use the word stole." Patricia snapped, her tone dripping with righteous indignation. "We are simply taking what is owed to us. Consider it back rent. You lived under our roof for 28 years. You ate our food, used our electricity, and occupied a room that your sister now desperately needs for her growing family. $15,000 barely covers a fraction of what you owe us." "I paid half the mortgage," I fired back, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I paid the property taxes. I kept the lights on when Dad's business tanked. You took my money to buy luxury furniture for a baby that is not even born yet, while you forced me out into a storm." "Family helps family," my mother said smoothly, completely ignoring my facts. "Brittany is stepping into her role as a mother. Trey is an entrepreneur on the verge of incredible success. They are building a legacy. You are just a single accountant who has refused to settle down or build anything meaningful. You should be proud to contribute to your sister's happiness. This is what family loyalty looks like, Savannah. You sacrifice for the greater good." I am standing outside a convenience store in the freezing rain, with $12 in my account, I said, my voice finally cracking. "I have nowhere to sleep tonight." "Then you better start walking," my mother replied coldly. Next time, try planning your life better. Do not call this number again. The line went dead. The sharp click of the hung-up phone echoed in my ear. I lowered my phone and stared out into the empty, rain-slicked street. The physical cold of the storm was nothing compared to the absolute ice spreading through my chest. That click was the sound of my family officially severing all ties. I had hit rock bottom. I was completely alone, financially ruined, and physically exhausted. But as I stood there shivering under the flickering neon sign of the convenience store, the crushing grief evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, relentless determination that sharpened every one of my senses. I wiped the wet hair out of my eyes. I was done crying. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my hand. I looked at the screen expecting to see a taunting text from Brittany or Trey. Instead, the caller ID showed the name of my boss, Mr. Mitchell Thorne. I worked at his mid-sized commercial real estate firm in downtown Chicago as a senior accountant and financial strategist. It was past midnight. Mitchell never called this late unless it was an absolute catastrophe. I answered the call. "Savannah, thank goodness you picked up," Mitchell said. His voice was frantic, breathless, with sheer panic. "I know it is the middle of the night, but we have a massive emergency." "What happened?" I asked, leaning against the cold brick wall. "The Horizon deal," Mitchell stammered. "The investment group just pulled out entirely. They got spooked by the new zoning regulations and withdrew their funding an hour ago. We are supposed to close on that portfolio of foreclosed suburban warehouses at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. If we do not have a buyer to step in and take over the capital requirements, our firm loses the earnest money. We will go bankrupt by tomorrow afternoon. I need you to scour our client lists and find anyone who might have liquid capital ready to deploy." I closed my eyes. The Horizon deal was my project. I was the one who had spent the last 6 months analyzing those foreclosed properties. I was the one who drafted the urban renewal blueprints, proving those useless warehouses could be converted into highly profitable tech incubators. I knew the math inside and out. I knew the exact profit margins. The properties were deeply undervalued, and the city was quietly preparing to approve tax incentives for redevelopment in that exact district. It was a goldmine waiting to be tapped. "Mitchell, finding a new institutional buyer in 8 hours is impossible," I said. "Nobody will commit $30 million without a week of due diligence." "Then we are finished," Mitchell groaned, sounding entirely defeated. "We are going to lose everything. The firm is dead." I listened to my boss panic, and in that exact moment, the pieces of my future snapped into perfect alignment. I had the financial models. I had the redevelopment blueprints. I had the knowledge of the city zoning incentives. The only thing the investment group lacked was the vision that I had carefully mapped out. I did not need my boss, and I certainly did not need an outside investor to take all the profits. I did not have $30 million. I had exactly $12.50. But in commercial real estate, you do not always need cash to secure a deal. You need a rock-solid corporate entity, a brilliant business plan to secure a commercial credit line, and the sheer audacity to execute a hostile takeover. "Do not cancel the contracts, Mitchell," I said, my voice steady and commanding. "Tell the sellers we will meet them at the title office at 8 o'clock sharp. We are not losing the earnest money." "What are you talking about?" Mitchell asked, completely bewildered. "Who is going to buy the portfolio?" I stared out into the pouring rain, watching the headlights of a passing truck cut through the darkness. The old Savannah would have panicked alongside her boss. The old Savannah would have accepted her family stealing her life savings. But that woman died tonight, discarded like trash on a flooded lawn. "I have secured a private buyer," I told my boss, letting the lie roll off my tongue with absolute conviction. "A new private equity group. They have reviewed my financial models, and they are ready to assume the risk. Just get the paperwork ready." I hung up the phone before he could ask any more questions. I pulled the hood of my jacket over my soaking wet hair. I had 8 hours to register an anonymous limited liability company online. I had 8 hours to leverage my own financial models to secure emergency bridge financing from a private lender I had cultivated a relationship with during my time at the firm. I was going to use my employer's imminent collapse to acquire the most lucrative real estate portfolio in the city. I was going to step into the shadows and build a private equity empire under a corporate veil. My family wanted me to live in the streets. Instead, I was going to buy the entire block. I picked up my 2 trash bags and began walking toward the city lights, ready to build my kingdom. 5 years is a long time in private equity. 5 years ago, I walked through the freezing rain of Chicago with 2 trash bags and a stolen life savings. Today, the warm breeze of Atlanta whipped past my face as I stepped out of an unmarked sedan. I stood staring up at a towering monument of glass and steel. The building was known as the Pinnacle. It was the most exclusive luxury complex in Georgia. And according to the mandatory Thanksgiving dinner invitation I received, my family currently occupied 2 rented penthouses on the 40th floor. I walked through the opulent lobby wearing simple dark jeans and an unbranded sweater. The concierge assumed I was a delivery driver. That was exactly how I wanted it. My family still believed I was a struggling accountant scraping by. They had no idea that I had built Apex Holdings into a private equity juggernaut controlling massive assets. I stepped into the elevator. My stomach tightened from the anticipation of seeing the people who threw me out into the streets. The mahogany doors of the penthouse were wide open. The space was a gaudy display of new money. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. "Savannah, you actually showed up?" a shrill voice echoed. I turned to see my sister Brittany descending a glass staircase. She wore a designer silk gown that looked absurd for a family dinner. Behind her walked my mother Patricia, clutching a crystal champagne flute. "We were starting to think your jalopy broke down." Patricia laughed, giving me a stiff hug. "You look exactly the same. Still shopping at discount stores." "Thank you for inviting me, Mother." I offered a polite smile. "The place is very large." "It is magnificent," my father Richard boomed, stepping out of the kitchen with Trey trailing behind him. Richard wore a velvet smoking jacket. Trey looked even more arrogant than he did 5 years ago, wearing a flashy silver suit and a massive Rolex watch. Richard gestured broadly. "2 penthouses, Savannah. One for Trey and Brittany, and one for us next door. The rent is astronomical, but when you are at the top of the cryptocurrency food chain like Trey, money is simply a concept." Trey smirked. "Good to see you, Savannah. Still crunching numbers for minimum wage. I told you years ago you should have let me invest your paycheck into my crypto fund." I let the insult slide, following them into the dining room. The table was set with heavy silver cutlery. As we sat down, the verbal assault began in earnest. For the next hour, I endured a relentless barrage of passive-aggressive jabs and outright mockery. They treated the meal as a performance stage to highlight their wealth and my supposed failure. Brittany complained about how exhausting it was to manage her personal chefs. She made a point to ask if my tiny apartment had running water. Patricia bragged about their vacation in Monaco, offering to send me a postcard, so I could see how the other half lived. Richard loudly praised Trey as the financial mastermind who had elevated the entire family into the elite upper class. I ate my food in silence, playing the role they expected. I was the dull, unsuccessful sister. But while they were busy running their mouths, I was busy watching them. And what I saw was a spectacular crumbling facade. My firm specialized in identifying distressed assets, and I knew a sinking ship when I saw one. I noticed the tiny details they thought were hidden. When Trey poured wine into his crystal glass, I recognized the distinct shape of the bottle he had quickly hidden in the kitchen. It was an $8 vintage from a discount liquor store, carefully decanted into a high-end pitcher. I noticed the Rolex on Trey's wrist. The sweeping motion of the second hand was slightly staggered. It was a flawless fake. I noticed how my father's velvet jacket had frayed stitching at the cuffs, and how my mother nervously checked her phone every time it buzzed, immediately dismissing notifications from debt collection agencies. But the biggest red flag was Trey's behavior. Beneath the arrogant swagger, the man was sweating profusely. His eyes darted around the room, and he aggressively rejected 3 separate calls from unlisted numbers, his jaw clenching tighter with every ring. He was not a financial genius. He was a desperate man drowning in a Ponzi scheme, and the water was rapidly rising above his head. They were living entirely on credit, leveraging phantom wealth to pay exorbitant rent for these 2 penthouses, desperately trying to keep up an illusion. They were broke. They were drowning in debt. and they had absolutely no idea that the silent, poorly dressed accountant sitting across from them was sitting on an empire. Are you even listening? Savannah Brittany snapped, slamming her fork down on the expensive china plates. I asked if your firm offers dental benefits yet, or if you still go to those free clinics. I looked at my sister, taking in her fake diamonds and her rented luxury lifestyle. I smiled, feeling a cold rush of power surge through my veins. The dinner was winding down, and their desperate charade was painfully obvious to anyone who knew how to look for the warning signs. I dabbed the corners of my mouth with a linen napkin and placed it neatly on the table. My dental plan is perfectly fine, Brittany, I replied, my voice steady and void of emotion. But thank you for your concern. It is truly inspiring to see how well you are all doing for yourselves. This building must cost a fortune. You have no idea, Trey scoffed, loosening his tie as another bead of sweat rolled down his forehead. We only deal in luxury. We own this town. I stared directly at him, maintaining a deadpan expression. I knew the truth about his massive financial lies. At 5 o'clock the next morning, I stood in the glass-enclosed corner office of Apex Holdings, overlooking the sprawling Atlanta skyline. My firm, my rules. In the 5 years since I was thrown out into the freezing rain, I had transformed a single distressed real estate deal into a massive private equity empire. Apex Holdings controlled $42 million in assets across the state. I was not a struggling accountant. I was the chief executive officer. My days were brutal, consisting of 14-hour shifts, fueled by black coffee and sheer ambition. The transition from discarded daughter to corporate raider was forged in fire. At Apex, we moved fast and we took no prisoners. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when my executive team filed into the conference room. I sat at the head of the long marble table reviewing a hostile takeover strategy for a failing logistics company. The current owners were trying to artificially inflate their valuation by hiding severe supply chain debts. I tossed the financial portfolio onto the table and looked at my acquisitions manager. They are lying about their quarterly overhead, I stated, tapping the page with my pen. Look at the equipment depreciation schedule. They are carrying ghost assets to secure better loan terms. Call their primary lender. Send them our internal audit of their actual inventory and offer to buy the debt for pennies on the dollar. Once we control their debt, we force a massive restructuring. They will sign the company over to us by Friday. My team nodded, instantly executing the orders. The energy in the room was electric. I thrived in this environment. Every negotiation was a battle, and mercy was a luxury I could not afford. I spent the next 6 hours dominating conference calls, authorizing multi-million-dollar wire transfers, and completely dismantling a rival firm's bid for a downtown commercial plaza. I was razor-sharp, commanding the room with a cold efficiency that would have utterly terrified the family who thought I was too weak to survive on my own. Just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the heavy glass door to my private office swung open. My legal director, Victoria, stepped inside and locked the door behind her. Victoria was a brilliant attorney who had been with me since the beginning. She bypassed my secretary only when a situation was critical. Victoria walked over to my desk and dropped a thick, unmarked manila folder right on top of my keyboard. She looked at me with a sharp, calculating expression. We have a massive development, Victoria said, taking a seat across from me. I just got a tip from a federal bankruptcy judge I used to clerk for. The news will not hit the public market until tomorrow morning, but a major holding company just filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy protection. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. Which holding company? I asked. Crestview Financial, Victoria replied, opening the folder and sliding a list of properties across my desk. They over-leveraged themselves on commercial retail spaces. Creditors are forcing a massive liquidation of all their prime residential assets to recover cash. Every property they own goes to the auction block this Friday. I scanned the list of properties, my eyes moving rapidly down the column of luxury high-rises and exclusive gated communities. And then I stopped. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face entirely neutral. Sitting in the middle of the distressed asset list was a familiar address, the Pinnacle. I stared at the name of the ultra-luxury complex. It was the exact same building where my arrogant family currently rented their twin penthouses. The same building where they had just mocked my career, flaunted their fake wealth, and treated me like a peasant. Victoria pointed to the listing. The Pinnacle is their crown jewel. She explained, her voice steady and professional. It generates millions in rent, but Crestview used the building as collateral for a massive loan they just defaulted on. The federal courts have ordered an immediate blind auction to satisfy the creditors. No public viewings, no prolonged bidding wars. Sealed bids, only highest cash offer wins the entire complex outright. My family was sitting in their rented penthouses on the 40th floor, looking down on the city, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had just collapsed. They thought they were untouchable elites. In reality, they were just tenants in a distressed asset about to be sold to the highest bidder. How much to take it down? I asked, my voice devoid of any hesitation. Victoria pulled out a calculator. The underlying debt is roughly 30 million. The complex is appraised at 40, but given the forced nature of the bankruptcy auction, the major institutional buyers will likely lowball their sealed bids. If we want a guaranteed win, we need to liquidate a portion of our secondary portfolio to free up heavy cash. It is a massive risk, Savannah. This one building would tie up almost our entire liquidity. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked out over the city, picturing the towering glass structure of the Pinnacle. I thought about the torrential rain 5 years ago. I thought about the trash bags on the lawn. I thought about my mother stealing my savings and my father demanding I live in the streets. Liquidate the secondary portfolio, I ordered, turning back to face Victoria. Sell off the suburban warehouses we acquired last year. I do not care if we take a slight hit on the profit margin. I want $35 million in pure, unencumbered cash ready by Thursday night. Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my aggressive pivot. We have never moved this much capital into a single residential asset before. Are you absolutely certain about this acquisition? I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life, I replied, staring directly into her eyes. Prepare the sealed bid under our most obscure shell corporation. I do not want anyone to know Apex Holdings is involved until the hammer falls and the ink is completely dry. We are going to buy the Pinnacle. Victoria nodded, recognizing the absolute finality in my tone. She gathered the documents, stood up, and headed for the door. I will have the wire transfers initiated immediately and draft the blind auction paperwork. We will own that building by Friday afternoon. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood alone in my office, a slow, dangerous smile finally breaking across my face. My family wanted to play games with fake money and rented luxury. I was going to show them what real power looked like. The quiet takeover had officially begun. The very next morning, I joined an engineering team dispatched by my firm to conduct a structural audit of the building. I needed to see the asset with my own eyes. I swapped my tailored suit for heavy canvas work pants, a plain utility shirt, and a generic visitor badge. I drove an unmarked fleet vehicle to the complex parking in the underground loading dock. I met my lead engineer, David, who handed me electrical blueprints. We rode the massive freight elevator up. Stepping into the grand lobby from the service corridor was like crossing into another dimension. The floors were imported Italian marble, polished to a mirror finish that reflected massive crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Expensive modern art lined the walls. Residents in designer clothing glided past velvet ropes, completely ignoring the maintenance crew. I kept my head down, pretending to verify load-bearing columns while calculating the square footage of the retail spaces. The entire building was absolutely immaculate. I separated from David to inspect structural pillars near the entrance. I was making notes on my clipboard when the heavy revolving doors spun rapidly. A loud, arrogant voice cut through the quiet elegance of the lobby. "I am telling you," the valet scratched my rim, the voice barked. "I want the manager down here now." I froze. I recognized that obnoxious tone instantly. I slowly stepped behind the massive width of a marble pillar and peered around the edge. It was Trey. He was pacing furiously near the reception desk, screaming into his phone. He wore a sharp navy blue suit, but his tie was pulled loose and his hair was unkempt. The wealthy, untouchable facade he had displayed at Thanksgiving dinner was completely gone. He ended the call, shoved the phone into his pocket, and marched toward the residential elevators. Before Trey could cross the center of the lobby, two men stepped out from the alcove near the concierge desk, blocking his path. Both men were massive, built like linebackers, wearing impeccably tailored charcoal suits that did nothing to hide the broad muscle underneath. They moved with terrifying precision. The taller man reached out and placed a heavy hand squarely in the center of Trey's chest, stopping his forward momentum instantly. Trey physically recoiled. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him sickly pale. From my vantage point behind the pillar, I was less than 15 feet away. The acoustics of the marble lobby amplified their hushed exchange, allowing me to hear every word. "You are a hard man to reach, Trey," the taller man said. His voice was raspy and devoid of emotion. "We left 4 voicemails yesterday. You did not call us back. I was going to call." Trey stammered, his hands visibly shaking. "I swear I was just up in my penthouse getting the paperwork together. The market took an unexpected dip. It is a temporary liquidity issue. You know how cryptocurrency fluctuates." The second man stepped closer, invading Trey's personal space. "We do not care about the crypto market," he whispered maliciously. "We care about the $400,000 you owe our boss. You promised a 20% guaranteed return by the 1st of the month. It is the 5th. The grace period is over." Trey swallowed hard, looking around the lobby in panic. The concierge was busy on a phone call, and the few residents present were actively avoiding eye contact. "Please, you have to give me until Friday," Trey begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "I have new investors lined up. Big money. I am pulling capital from my father-in-law's retirement accounts right now to cover the margins. I am cycling the new funds to pay out the old contracts. I just need 3 more days to clear the wire transfers." I stood frozen behind the pillar, my grip tightening on the clipboard until my knuckles ached. The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. He was not just broke. He was not just faking his lavish lifestyle. Trey was running a massive illegal Ponzi scheme. He was taking money from dangerous underground creditors to fund his fake crypto business, and he was using new investor money to pay off the old debts. Now that the well had run dry, he was actively draining my parents' retirement accounts to save his own life. The taller man grabbed Trey by the lapels of his expensive suit, pulling him forcefully forward. "You are out of time," he growled. "We are not waiting for your imaginary wire transfers. You have 48 hours to deliver the principal amount in full. If we have to come back to this building, we are coming up to that penthouse, and we are going to have a very loud conversation with your pregnant wife. Do you understand me?" Trey nodded frantically, tears welling in his eyes. "I understand you perfectly. 48 hours is fine. I swear I will get all the money for you." The men slowly released him, smoothing down his wrinkled lapels in a very mocking gesture. They turned and walked calmly out of the glass doors, disappearing into the busy Atlanta City street. Trey stood alone in the center of the lobby, chest heaving as he gasped for air. He looked completely broken, a pathetic shell, realizing his entire world was about to violently collapse. He stumbled toward the elevator bank, dragging his feet as if walking to the gallows. I remained completely and absolutely hidden behind the pillar until the elevator doors closed. My family had tied their financial future to a man actively stealing their money to pay off dangerous criminals. They had thrown me away to worship a fraud. The revelation was staggering, giving me the ultimate leverage. I did not just have the power to buy their building. I now had the exact ammunition needed to orchestrate their absolute destruction. I adjusted my safety badge, walked out of the lobby, and prepared the final trap. I adjusted my safety badge and stepped out from behind the massive marble pillar, ready to head back to the loading dock. My objective was complete. I had the information I needed. But as I walked across the polished Italian marble floor toward the service corridor, the silver doors of the residential elevator chimed loudly. Trey did not step inside. Instead, he abruptly turned around, his path blocked by a distinguished older man wearing a perfectly tailored black suit with a gold lapel pin. It was Mr. Sterling, the general manager of the Pinnacle. Mr. Sterling held a silver tablet in his hand, and his expression was a mask of practiced, professional, polite annoyance. Mr. Evans Sterling said, his voice carrying perfectly across the quiet lobby. "I am glad I caught you before you went upstairs. We have an urgent matter regarding the balance on your account. The association fees for both penthouses are now 60 days past due, and the payment method on file has been declined for the third time this week." Trey flinched, the remaining color draining from his face. He had just been violently threatened by underground criminals, and now he was being publicly humiliated by the building manager in the center of the grand lobby. A few wealthy residents walking past slowed their pace, their ears perking up at the mention of declined payments. Trey was a narcissist who thrived on public perception. Being exposed as a fraud in front of his peers was a fate worse than death. He needed a distraction. He needed a target. He needed someone lower on the social ladder to step on so he could elevate himself back to his fake throne. He frantically scanned the room, his desperate eyes darting past the velvet ropes and the crystal chandeliers, and then he saw me. I was standing near the service corridor wearing heavy canvas work pants, a plain gray utility shirt, and a generic visitor badge clipped to my chest pocket. I was holding a metal clipboard. To anyone else, I was just a nameless contractor. But Trey recognized me instantly. His eyes widened, and a twisted, vicious smile spread across his sweaty face. He saw his perfect escape route. "Well, well, well," Trey announced, his voice suddenly booming through the lobby. He completely ignored the building manager and marched directly toward me, puffing out his chest and aggressively adjusting his expensive silk tie. "I do not believe it. I thought they only let authorized personnel in through the service entrance. What are you doing here, Savannah? Did your accounting firm fire you? Are you delivering packages now?" Mr. Sterling turned around, looking confused by the sudden outburst. He glanced at his tablet, likely checking the vendor logs, and then looked at me. I maintained a completely blank expression. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with Trey. Trey stopped a few feet away from me, crossing his arms and laughing loudly. He made sure his voice echoed so that everyone in the lobby, especially Mr. Sterling, could hear him perfectly. "Look at you," Trey mocked, gesturing wildly at my canvas work pants and utility shirt. "I told you that you were destined for the bottom rungs of society. You are wearing a janitor outfit in the most exclusive building in Atlanta. It is pathetic. Are you here to unclog the toilets? Because if you are, you should start on the 40th floor. My penthouse has 5 bathrooms, and I only want the best delivery girls scrubbing my imported porcelain." I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight. I did not say a single word. My silence only fueled his desperate need to perform. Trey turned back to the building manager, pointing a thumb in my direction. "Do not worry about those declined payments," Sterling Trey boasted, completely fabricating his reality. "It is just a minor banking error from an overseas wire transfer. I am moving $10 million in cryptocurrency this afternoon. In fact, I have so much cash lying around that I can afford to do some charity work right here in your lobby to help out my struggling sister-in-law." Trey reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. He aggressively pulled out a crisp $20 bill. He held it up in the air, making sure the lingering residents and the lobby staff saw his grand gesture of supposed wealth. "Here you go, Savannah," Trey sneered, looking down his nose at me with absolute contempt. "Consider this an advance on your tip. Go down to the corner cafe and fetch me a black coffee. Keep the change. Buy yourself a new shirt. You look absolutely ridiculous." He flicked his wrist and threw the $20 bill directly at me. The green paper fluttered through the air and landed silently on the polished marble floor, resting exactly at the tips of my steel-toed work boots. The lobby went completely silent. The sheer disrespect of the action was palpable. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, his professional demeanor cracking under the weight of the awkward tension. He looked completely horrified by Trey's behavior. The building manager opened his mouth to intervene, raising his hand to apologize to me for the residents' aggressive conduct. Before Sterling could speak, I shifted my gaze directly to him. I dropped the subservient contractor act completely. I locked eyes with the building manager and delivered a single razor-sharp look that radiated absolute authority. It was the exact same commanding glare I used in corporate boardrooms to silence hostile negotiators. Sterling froze instantly. He recognized the immediate shift in power. Even though I was dressed in cheap canvas and standing next to a discarded $20 bill, My demeanor screamed corporate dominance. He wisely closed his mouth and took a step back, allowing the scene to play out without his interference. I slowly lowered my gaze to the $20 bill resting on the marble floor. I looked at the crumpled paper, and then I looked back up at Trey. He was panting slightly, a desperate manic grin plastered on his face. He actually believed he had won. He believed he had successfully deflected from his massive debts and proved his superiority by humiliating his wife's sister in public. He had no idea that I had just watched him beg for his life. He had no idea that I knew he was actively stealing my parents' retirement money. And he certainly had no idea that the woman he just threw a $20 bill at was currently finalizing a $35 million wire transfer to purchase the very floor he was standing on. I did not pick up the money. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my honor. Engaging with a dead man was a complete waste of my time. I simply offered Trey a cold, empty smile. A smile that contained zero warmth and absolute destruction. I turned on my heel, my steel-toed boots clicking against the marble floor, and walked purposefully toward the service corridor. I left the $20 bill sitting exactly where it fell. "Hey, I am talking to you, Trey," yelled after me, his voice cracking with a sudden sharp edge of panic as his audience began to lose interest. "You do not just walk away from me." But I kept walking. The heavy metal doors of the service corridor swung shut behind me, completely cutting off his desperate shouts. I walked down the concrete hallway toward the loading dock, my heart beating with a steady, lethal rhythm. Trey had just dug his own grave in front of the building management. He was a cornered animal lashing out at shadows, completely oblivious to the fact that the trap had already been triggered. His financial house of cards was rapidly collapsing around him, and I was going to be the one to light the match that burned it all to the ground. Let him enjoy his fake victory today. By Friday afternoon, I would own his entire world. Friday morning arrived with heavy gray clouds. But inside the executive boardroom of Apex Holdings, the atmosphere was electric. I stood at the head of the glass conference table staring at the speakerphone. My legal director, Victoria, was sitting in a secure federal bankruptcy courtroom across town. She was armed with a secure earpiece, a blank checkbook, and absolute authority to execute my commands. To the judge and the competing buyers, Victoria represented an anonymous shell company known only as Blackwood Ventures. The auction for the Pinnacle began precisely at 9 o'clock. The judge opened the floor explaining the rules of the forced liquidation. Because of the massive debt Crestview Financial owed, the opening bid was set at a staggering $25 million. I paced the length of the boardroom, listening to the muffled ambient noise of the courtroom feeding through the speaker. My executive team sat around the table, their eyes fixed on me. Failure was not an option. The judge banged his gavel. The initial sealed bids were opened and recorded. Victoria's voice crackled through the speaker. "Savannah, we have a complication," she reported. The sealed bids did not eliminate the competition. Two major institutional buyers matched our baseline offer: Vanguard Realty and Sterling Mutual. The judge has moved the auction into an open outcry phase among the top three bidders. It is a live bidding war now. My jaw tightened. Vanguard and Sterling were massive conglomerates. They wanted the Pinnacle just as badly as I did, looking at the building as a spreadsheet. I was looking at it as a battlefield. "Let them bid," I commanded, keeping my voice cold and steady. "Do not make a move until they break the 30 million threshold." The live auction commenced. The numbers flew across the courtroom with terrifying speed. Vanguard opened at 27 million. Sterling immediately countered with 28. The rapid exchange of millions of dollars would have sent a normal person into panic, but my pulse remained perfectly even. I had spent the last 48 hours tearing apart the audits of the Pinnacle. I knew the hidden flaws in the underlying debt structure that Crestview Financial had desperately tried to bury. 31 million, the Vanguard representative called out. 32, Sterling Mutual fired back. Victoria cleared her throat into her microphone. "They are pushing the valuation high, Savannah. We are approaching the $35 million ceiling we established. What is the play?" I leaned over the conference table, staring directly at the speaker. The corporate buyers were treating the Pinnacle like a pristine asset. They did not know what I knew. During my incognito inspection, I accessed the city zoning records and secondary liens. Crestview Financial had quietly taken out a massive loan against the underground parking structure. That secondary balloon payment was due in 60 days. Any buyer would unknowingly assume that toxic debt. Vanguard and Sterling are calculating their bids based on an unencumbered cash flow model, I explained to my team, a sharp smile forming on my lips. They do not know about the $7 million balloon payment. If they bid past $34 million, they will instantly put themselves in the red. I am not flying blind. $33 million, Vanguard announced. Sterling Mutual fell silent. The rapid bidding war ground to a sudden halt. Through the speaker, I heard the Sterling proxy quietly conferring with his team. Seconds ticked by. The judge warned that he was preparing to close the floor. Sterling is out, Victoria whispered. Vanguard is holding at $33 million. Savannah, do I execute the counter? Hit them, I ordered. End it right now. Bid $35 million flat. In the courtroom, Victoria stood up. Her voice rang out clear and authoritative. Blackwood Ventures bids $35 million. A loud murmur erupted in the courtroom. It was a massive, aggressive jump over Vanguard's bid. It was an intimidation tactic designed to instantly crush any remaining hope the competition had. I listened as the Vanguard representative frantically dialed his corporate headquarters. My aggressive overbid had completely paralyzed their risk models. The Vanguard representative slowly lowered his phone. Vanguard withdraws, he announced, defeat heavy in his voice. The judge cleared his throat. Are there any further bids, he asked. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Going once at $35 million, going twice. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down with a resounding crack that echoed through the speakerphone. Sold, the judge declared. The pinnacle is awarded to Blackwood Ventures for $35 million. My executive team erupted into cheers. I let out a slow breath, closing my eyes for a fraction of a second. We had done it. Against two corporate giants, we had successfully executed the largest single acquisition in the history of Apex Holdings. Congratulations, Savannah Victoria, said through the earpiece. The judge is preparing the final transfer documents now. The funds have been wired and verified. The title is officially clear. You own the building. I stood perfectly still, letting the reality of those words wash over me. I owned the building. I owned the imported Italian marble lobby, where Trey had just thrown a $20 bill at my feet. I owned the grand elevators, the underground parking garage, and the two ultra-luxury penthouses on the 40th floor. Have the title transferred out of the shell company immediately, I instructed Victoria, my voice dropping to a low register. I want the deed officially registered under my name, Savannah. Ensure my full legal name is printed on every single eviction notice. I hung up the phone and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, looking out at the city below. 5 years ago, I was a discarded daughter standing in the freezing rain. My family had demanded I go live in the streets. They had stolen my savings and mocked my existence. Today, I was a multi-million-dollar private equity CEO, and I had just bought their entire world. The financial trap had officially snapped shut. Victoria offered a rare, genuine smile, congratulated me one last time, and left me alone to celebrate. I walked over to the private bar in the corner of my office and uncorked a bottle of vintage red wine I had been saving for 5 years. I poured a heavy measure into a crystal glass. The rich aroma filled the room. I took a slow sip, savoring the absolute victory. Everything had gone exactly according to my plan. The corporate takeover was flawless. Now, it was time to initiate the personal destruction. As I raised the glass to my lips for a second sip, the silence of the office was shattered. My personal cell phone vibrated violently against the mahogany desk, the sharp buzzing sound echoing off the glass walls. I set my wine down and looked at the screen. The caller ID flashed brightly. It was my mother, Patricia. She had not called my personal number in 5 years. Even when they invited me to that toxic Thanksgiving dinner, they had used a generic email to send the summons. A phone call meant one of two things. Either someone was dead or someone was desperate. Knowing what I knew about Trey and his massive fraudulent debt, I was banking heavily on the latter. I let it ring 3 times, letting her stew in her panic before I casually swiped the screen and answered. "Savannah, you need to get over here right now," Patricia screamed into the phone. the absolute second the line connected. She was completely frantic, gasping for air as if she had just sprinted up a flight of stairs. There was no greeting. There was no apology for the years of emotional abuse. There was no acknowledgement of Trey humiliating me in the lobby just 2 days prior. There was only the raw, unfiltered entitlement of a woman who fully expected the daughter she threw away to come running at the snap of her fingers. I leaned back in my leather chair, completely unfazed by her hysteria. "Hello, Mother," I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly detached. "It is late. I am busy." "Do not give me that attitude!" Patricia shrieked, her voice cracking with a level of sheer terror I had never heard from her before. "Drop whatever useless paperwork you are doing and get to the penthouse immediately. We have a massive family emergency. It is Trey. It is your father. Everything is completely falling apart and we need you here this exact second." I took another sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch out over the line. I could hear chaotic background noise through the phone. I heard the distinct sound of glass shattering against a hard floor. I heard my sister Brittany wailing uncontrollably, a high-pitched hysterical sobbing that sounded like a wounded animal. And underneath it all, I heard the heavy, aggressive shouting of a man in total distress. It sounded like Trey had finally hit the wall. The underground creditors must have made good on their threat, or the massive hole in my parents' retirement account had just been violently exposed. "What exactly is the emergency?" I asked, calmly feigning complete ignorance. "Have you tried calling the police?" "We absolutely cannot call the police," Patricia snapped back, her voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. "You do not understand. You just need to get here. You are an accountant. You know how to deal with numbers and contracts. We need someone who can look at these documents and figure out a way out of this nightmare. You owe us this, Savannah. We are your family. We put a roof over your head for years. Get in your car and drive to the Pinnacle right now, or I swear I will never forgive you." The audacity was truly breathtaking. She was attempting to emotionally blackmail me using the exact same tactics that had worked when I was 20 years old. She actually believed that shouting at me would trigger my old ingrained obedience. She thought I was still the weak, desperate girl crying on the flooded lawn, begging for scraps of their affection. I looked down at the master deed sitting on my desk, the document that proved I was the sole owner of the luxury complex she was currently standing in. I smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. I did not need to run from her toxicity anymore. I held every single card in the deck. "Fine," I said, keeping my tone carefully measured to sound like a reluctant, defeated concession. "I will come over. Give me 20 minutes to get to the building." "Do not bother checking in at the front desk," Patricia ordered frantically. "The lobby staff are asking too many questions about our accounts. Just take the service elevator directly to the 40th floor. And hurry up." The line went dead with a sharp click. I lowered the phone, placing it gently on the desk next to the bottle of wine. I picked up the master deed from my desk. The stage was set. I placed the master deed carefully inside my leather briefcase, snapped the brass locks shut, and walked out of my office. The drive from the corporate plaza to the Pinnacle took exactly 18 minutes. I pulled my unmarked sedan into the underground loading dock, bypassing the grand lobby entirely just as my mother had demanded. The service elevator was a stark contrast to the opulence of the main building, all brushed steel and fluorescent lights. It shot upward with brutal efficiency. I watched the digital floor indicator climb rapidly, 30, 35, 40. The heavy metal doors slid open with a mechanical chime. I stepped directly into the private foyer of my parents' rented penthouse. The sheer scale of the destruction hit me instantly. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy life had been violently ripped apart. The foyer was normally decorated with towering Ming vases and expensive abstract sculptures. Now it looked like a war zone. Thousands of shards of shattered porcelain covered the imported hardwood floors. A massive puddle of spilled red wine, soaked into a white Persian rug, looking distressingly like a crime scene. I carefully stepped over a broken crystal decanter and walked toward the sunken living room. The noise was deafening. Brittany was collapsed on the floor near the velvet sofa. She was wearing a ruined silk dress, her makeup completely smeared down her face, screaming hysterically. It was not a sad cry. It was the terrifying, high-pitched wail of a spoiled child who had just been told the universe did not revolve around her. She was pounding her fists against the floorboards, tearing at her hair completely unhinged. Trey was pacing back and forth across the room like a trapped animal. His designer suit jacket was discarded on a chair, his tie was ripped off, and his dress shirt was soaked in sweat. He was frantically chewing on his fingernails, muttering incoherently to himself, his eyes wide and bloodshot. Every time he turned near the floor-to-ceiling windows, he flinched as if expecting a sniper to take him out. The arrogant, untouchable crypto-billionaire I had seen in the lobby was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified criminal. My father Richard was slumped in a leather armchair clutching his chest. His face was an unhealthy shade of purple, and he was hyperventilating, struggling to pull air into his lungs. My mother Patricia was darting between all of them, holding a wet cloth, completely frantic, trying to silence the screaming. "Savannah, you are finally here!" Patricia shrieked, dropping the cloth and running toward me. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. Tell your father that this is just a temporary setback. Tell him that market corrections happen and we can recover from this nightmare." I gently but firmly detached her hand from my arm. "Recover from what?" I asked, maintaining a perfectly calm, neutral expression. "What exactly happened here?" Richard let out a sound that was half sob, half roar. He lunged forward in his chair, pointing a shaking finger directly at Trey. "He stole it. He stole everything. My entire life. My retirement. Every single penny I worked for is gone." "I did not steal it," Trey screamed back, his voice cracking with panic. "It was a bridge loan. You authorized the transfer. You signed the paperwork, Richard. I told you I needed temporary liquidity to secure a massive overseas crypto acquisition. You told me it was a guaranteed 30% return within 48 hours." Richard roared, his face turning an even darker shade of purple. "You told me the funds were sitting in a secure escrow account. You lied to me. I called the broker this morning. The account does not exist. The money is gone. $2 million, Trey. My entire retirement portfolio. Where is it?" Trey stopped pacing and backed away, hitting the edge of the glass coffee table. "The market crashed," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically. "I had to cover the margin calls. The brokers were demanding immediate payment. And then I had some other investors, private investors. They wanted their returns early. I had to pay them back to keep the fund solvent." "He was running a Ponzi scheme," I said quietly. The entire room froze. The hysterical crying stopped. The shouting ceased. All four of them turned to stare at me. "What did you just say?" Patricia whispered, her eyes wide with horror. I stepped further into the room, kicking a piece of broken porcelain out of my way. "He was paying off early investors with new investor money. That is why he needed your retirement fund, Dad. His old investors were likely dangerous people demanding their money back. So he drained your accounts to pay them off, hoping a miracle would save him. There was no overseas crypto acquisition. There was no secure escrow account. It was a massive fraud." Brittany let out another blood-curdling scream and threw a silver decorative bowl across the room. It smashed against the wall inches from Trey's head. "You ruined us," she shrieked at her husband. "You promised me a mansion. You promised me yachts. We have absolutely nothing." "It gets worse," Richard groaned, burying his face in his hands. "It is not just the retirement fund. We have no cash flow. None. We have been living off credit cards for 6 months. Because Trey assured us his big payout was coming, we kept spending to maintain appearances. We are completely bankrupt." Patricia wrung her hands together, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. She looked at me completely shattered. "The building management called us this morning, Savannah. Mr. Sterling, the general manager. He was absolutely furious. Trey's bank accounts have been frozen by federal regulators. The association fees for both of these penthouses bounced again." "How far behind are you?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. 4 months, Patricia confessed, her voice dropping to a shameful whisper. "We are 4 months behind on rent for both units. The management office sent a final notice this afternoon. They said if we do not provide a certified cashier check for the full arrears by Monday morning, they are initiating emergency eviction protocols. They are going to throw us out into the street." The poetic justice of her exact words hung heavily in the air. 5 years ago, they had thrown me out into the freezing rain and told me to go live in the streets. Now, standing in their ruined penthouse, they were facing the exact same fate. I looked around the room, taking in the shattered vases, the ruined silk dress, and the absolute despair painted on their faces. The golden child was throwing a tantrum on the floor. The arrogant crypto genius was a trembling, pathetic fraud. The cruel parents were bankrupt and facing imminent homelessness. The destruction was complete, but I knew my family better than anyone. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals always look for someone else to take the bite. They had summoned me here for a reason. They were not looking for comfort. They were not looking for emotional support. They were looking for a victim. I stood perfectly still amidst the wreckage of their fake lives. So I asked quietly, "Why exactly did you call me here?" Patricia stood up straight, her tears vanishing instantly. The vulnerability she displayed seconds ago evaporated, replaced by a hardened, accusatory glare. "We called you here because this is partly your fault, Savannah," she snapped, gesturing wildly around the ruined room. I blinked, genuinely impressed by the speed of her mental gymnastics. "My fault. I have not spoken to you in 5 years." "That is exactly the problem," Richard bellowed from his armchair, suddenly finding the strength to sit up. He slammed his fist onto the leather armrest. "You abandoned this family. When Trey came to us with his investment firm, we asked you to review the prospectus. We asked you to be part of the team. But you were too arrogant. You refused to help your own brother-in-law." I stared at him, refusing to let the gaslighting take hold. "You kicked me out of the house in the middle of a thunderstorm," I reminded him, keeping my voice completely level. "You stole my college fund to pay for Brittany's destination wedding. I did not refuse to help you. I was homeless." "Stop exaggerating," Patricia hissed, waving her hand dismissively, as if my homelessness was a minor inconvenience. "We asked you to leave because your negative energy was tearing this family apart. And look what happened. You carried that toxic jealousy with you. You have been putting evil out into the universe, and now it has come back to punish us." Brittany suddenly scrambled up from the floor, her ruined silk dress clinging to her legs. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face. "You always hated him," she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly across the penthouse. "You were jealous that I married a visionary entrepreneur, while you were busy crunching numbers in some pathetic cubicle. You wanted Trey to fail. You manifested this disaster because you could not stand seeing me happy." The sheer delusion radiating from the three of them was physically suffocating. They had lost millions of dollars to a criminal Ponzi scheme. They were 4 months behind on rent. They were facing imminent eviction. Yet in their twisted reality, the entire collapse was caused by my bad vibes. Trey, sensing a shift in the room's power dynamic, seized the opportunity to play the victim. He stopped cowering by the windows and puffed out his chest, stepping forward to align himself with my parents. "Brittany is right," he said, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. "Business is about confidence, Savannah. It is about momentum. When a core family member actively doubts the enterprise, it creates a fracture in the foundation." My private investors caught wind of the family discord. They sensed the instability. That is why they pulled out. If you had just supported me publicly, if you had just invested your own money to show solidarity, the fund would have stabilized. This liquidity crisis is a direct result of your lack of faith. I looked at Trey, then at Brittany, and finally at my parents. It was a masterclass in deflection. I was the designated scapegoat. I was the dumping ground for every single one of their failures. "So let me make sure I understand this completely," I said, crossing my arms over my chest. "Trey runs a fraudulent investment scheme. He drains $2 million of your retirement money to pay off dangerous loan sharks. He fails to pay the rent on these luxury penthouses for 4 consecutive months. But the reason you are all bankrupt and facing eviction today is because my negative energy spooked the financial markets." "Do not use that condescending tone with me," Patricia shouted, stepping into my personal space. She jabbed a finger hard against my shoulder. "We are not going to stand here and debate the past. We called you here to fix it. You are an accountant. You understand how these corporate structures work. We need you to clear this up immediately." "Clear what up?" I asked, leaning slightly forward. "The rent," Richard demanded, his face red with unearned authority. "Mr. Sterling wants a certified cashier check by Monday morning. The total arrears for both units, including late penalties, is $180,000. We need you to pay it. I let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a genuine reaction to the absolute absurdity of his demand. You want me to give you $180,000? Do not act like you cannot afford it, Brittany sneered, crossing her arms defensively. You have been hoarding your salary for 5 years. You have no husband. You have no children. You have no life. What else are you spending your money on? Patricia nodded aggressively in agreement. We know you work for a major firm, Savannah. You have access to corporate accounts. You know how to move money around without raising red flags. You can take out a personal loan, or you can borrow against your company ledgers. I do not care how you do it, but you are going to walk into that management office on Monday morning and hand them a check. They were explicitly demanding that I commit corporate embezzlement to save them from a crisis they created. The entitlement was a bottomless pit. They honestly believed they had the absolute right to destroy my career, my freedom, and my financial stability just to maintain their fake luxury lifestyle for a few more months. And what happens after Monday? I asked, maintaining my icy composure. Even if I miraculously produce nearly $200,000 to pay your back rent. Trey is still completely bankrupt. The retirement fund is still gone. The federal regulators have frozen his accounts. How do you plan to pay rent next month? We will figure that out later, Richard snapped impatiently. Right now, we just need to stop the eviction. Once the pressure is off, Trey can start making calls. He can find new investors. He just needs a runway to launch his next project. We are a family, Savannah. You have a duty to step up when things get difficult. I stared into my father's desperate, angry eyes. He was willing to sacrifice me without a second thought. My mother was nodding along, perfectly content to throw me to the wolves if it meant she could keep her panoramic views and her membership at the country club. Patricia reached over to the glass coffee table, carefully avoiding the broken pieces of porcelain. She picked up a thick manila envelope and shoved it forcefully into my hands. This is the eviction notice, she commanded, her voice turning sharp and icy. The exact payment details are on the second page. Mr. Sterling expects the funds by 9 a.m. sharp. Do not embarrass us, Savannah. If we lose this penthouse, we will make sure everyone in this city knows exactly how selfish and ungrateful you truly are. I looked down at the manila envelope resting in my hands. The heavy paper felt smooth beneath my fingertips. I did not need to open it. I knew exactly what was printed on the second page. I knew the exact routing number they were supposed to send the money to. I knew it because I was the one who had authorized the notice. I slowly looked up, meeting the collective glare of my toxic family. They stood united against me, a wall of arrogance and entitlement, completely blind to the reality of their situation. They thought they had just cornered me into submission. They thought they had successfully passed their burden onto my shoulders. I gripped the envelope tightly in my right hand. I will take care of the eviction notice, I promised them, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. You do not need to worry about Mr. Sterling anymore. Patricia let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, immediately turning away from me, as if I was a servant who had just been dismissed. Good, she muttered, rubbing her temples. Now get out. The sight of you is giving me a migraine. We have real problems to solve. I did not say another word. I turned around and walked out of the ruined penthouse, my steel-toed boots crunching over the shattered porcelain. The elevator doors closed behind me, shutting out their delusions. Monday morning was going to be the greatest day of my life. The metal doors of the service elevator were inches from sliding completely shut when a scuffed dress shoe jammed violently into the narrow gap. The safety sensor triggered immediately, and the heavy doors groaned, reversing their path to reveal the vestibule. Trey stood there, panting heavily, sweat pouring down his forehead. Behind him, my mother marched forward, her heels clicking aggressively against the floorboards. She was clutching a thick black leather binder against her chest. Get back inside, Patricia barked, her voice echoing in the small elevator cab. We are not finished with you yet. Paying the rent buys us a few weeks, but it does not solve the immediate crisis. I stared at them, my hand hovering near the control panel. I had expected them to be satisfied with my false promise to handle the eviction notice. But their greed and desperation were bottomless pits. I stepped out of the elevator, my steel-toed boots hitting the floor with a heavy thud, and followed them back into the ruined penthouse. They led me past the shattered porcelain in the foyer and directly into the massive chef's kitchen. Patricia threw the black leather binder onto the pristine white marble island. It hit the stone surface with a loud, authoritative smack. She flipped it open, revealing a thick stack of legal documents printed on cheap paper. "Sit down and read," Patricia commanded, pointing a rigid finger at the leather barstool. I did not sit. I stepped up to the marble counter and looked down at the paperwork. The bold heading at the top of the first page read, "Apex Capital Solutions." It was an ironclad, high-interest personal loan agreement. The principal amount requested was $200,000. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my tone carefully neutral. "It is the only way to keep Trey out of federal prison," Richard announced, walking into the kitchen and leaning heavily against the refrigerator. "The rent is a civil issue, Savannah. But the investors Trey borrowed from are not going to wait for a market correction. They have retained aggressive legal counsel. If Trey does not wire $200,000 to their trust account by tomorrow afternoon, they are going straight to the district attorney to file criminal fraud charges." "And you expect this predatory lending company to just hand him that kind of cash?" I asked, scanning the front page. "They will not hand it to him," Brittany snapped, walking into the kitchen and crossing her arms defensively. "Trey's credit score is completely ruined. The federal regulators flagged his social security number this morning. My credit is tied to his, so I cannot apply. And Mom and Dad have maxed out every single revolving credit line they have to maintain this penthouse. None of us can get approved for a car loan right now, let alone $200,000. Patricia tapped her manicured fingernail aggressively against the signature line at the bottom of the page. "That is where you come in," she stated, looking me dead in the eye. "You have a clean, boring accountant name. You have zero debt, a stable corporate salary, and a spotless financial record. You are the perfect applicant. All you have to do is sign on the dotted line and the money will be wired to Trey's account within 24 hours. I stared at my mother, genuinely fascinated by the sheer magnitude of her audacity. I looked back down at the contract and began to read the fine print. It took my professionally trained eyes exactly 4 seconds to realize this was not just a bad loan. It was a financial death sentence. "Are you completely out of your mind?" I asked, looking up from the pages. "The interest rate on this loan is 42% annually. It is a predatory trap designed to enslave desperate people. The terms include a confession of judgment clause, meaning they can garnish my wages and seize my bank accounts the second a payment is missed without even taking me to court. If I sign this, I will be financially ruined for the rest of my natural life." "Stop being so dramatic," Trey scoffed, wiping the sweat from his upper lip. "It is just a temporary bridge loan. I am not going to leave you holding the bag, Savannah. I just need your clean name to get the capital. As soon as I secure my next round of venture funding, I will pay the entire balance off in one lump sum. You will not even have to make the first monthly payment." I was lying. His eyes darted to the floor and his voice lacked any real conviction. He knew he was never going to pay it back. He was perfectly willing to destroy my entire future just to buy himself a few more months of freedom. "I will not sign this," I said firmly, pushing the binder back across the marble counter. "It is financial suicide." Patricia slammed both of her hands flat against the marble, leaning over the island until she was inches from my face. "You will sign it," she hissed, her voice vibrating with pure malice. "You owe this family, Savannah. We clothed you, we fed you, we gave you everything, and you threw it all away because you were too selfish to appreciate it." "You threw me out into the street," I corrected her, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "You told me I was a worthless burden." "And we were right," Richard shouted, stepping forward aggressively. "You are a burden. You have always been a disappointment. But right now you have one chance to finally be useful. Your sister's husband is facing federal prison. Your family is facing absolute destruction. Signing that paper is your basic duty. It is the absolute minimum you can do to repay us for the years we spent tolerating your existence." Brittany stepped up next to our mother, her tear-stained face twisted into an ugly, entitled sneer. "Just sign the stupid paper, Savannah. Your boring little life is not going to change. You will just keep going to your boring little job." "But Trey is a visionary. He cannot survive in a prison cell. He needs this. We need this. Stop being a selfish brat and do your job. They were surrounding me, a chorus of venom and entitlement. They truly believed I was nothing more than a disposable tool, an empty vessel created solely to absorb their failures and fund their delusions. They wanted me to sign away my future, my security, and my freedom all, so Trey could continue playing the role of a wealthy entrepreneur while my parents sipped champagne in a rented penthouse they could not afford. I looked at the signature line on the final page of the contract. I thought about the master deed sitting securely inside my leather briefcase. I thought about Monday morning, when the shell company would officially dissolve and my name would replace Crestview Financial on every single eviction notice in the building. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my silver fountain pen. The room instantly fell silent. My parents exchanged a victorious glance. Trey let out a massive sigh of relief, his shoulders slumping. They thought they had broken me. They thought their relentless gaslighting had finally chipped away my resolve. I clicked the pen open, but I did not touch it to the paper. Instead, I calmly picked up the entire stack of loan documents. I looked directly into my mother's triumphant eyes. "I am going to take these home and review them thoroughly," I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "A loan of this magnitude requires proper due diligence. I will run the numbers tonight and bring the paperwork to the management office on Monday morning along with the eviction settlement." Patricia snatched her hand back, a smug smile spreading across her face. "See," she said, looking at Richard. "I told you she would eventually listen to reason. Do not take too long reviewing them, Savannah. We need that money wired by tomorrow afternoon. I will handle everything exactly the way it deserves to be handled. I promise," sliding the predatory contract into my briefcase right next to the master deed. I turned my back on them and walked out of the kitchen. This time, no one stopped the elevator doors. I pressed the button for the underground garage, the heavy metal sealing me inside. They had handed me the final nail for their coffin. They wanted me to use my clean accountant name to save them. Instead, I was going to use it to wipe them off the map. The heavy metal doors of the service elevator had barely sealed shut when a harsh metallic grinding noise echoed through the shaft. The cab jerked to a violent halt, throwing me slightly off balance. Before the descent could even begin, the doors were forcefully pried open from the outside. My father stood in the vestibule, his face a terrifying shade of crimson. He had a master override key jammed into the wall panel, something he undoubtedly bullied out of the building staff months ago. He was breathing heavily, his fists clenched at his sides. The false sense of victory they had moments ago was gone, replaced by a sudden paranoid realization. He knew I was stalling. He knew my promise to review the documents was a polite refusal. "You think you are so clever," Richard snarled, stepping into the small elevator cab and letting the doors slide shut behind him. The space instantly felt suffocating. He hit the emergency stop button, trapping us suspended between floors. I stood my ground, my hand gripping the handle of my leather briefcase. "I told you I would handle it on Monday," I said calmly. "Step aside. You are not leaving this building until that contract is signed." Richard roared, his voice bouncing off the steel walls. "You think you can walk in here, judge us, question the interest rates, and just waltz back to your perfect little life? You think you can deny your own blood when we are standing on the edge of a cliff? I am not signing a predatory loan that guarantees my financial ruin." I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. "I will not pay for Trey's criminal mistakes." Richard closed the distance between us, backing me into the corner of the elevator. The smell of stale scotch and panic radiated from him. He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly in my face. "You listen to me very carefully, Savannah. I know exactly who you work for. I know you are a senior accountant at Apex Holdings. I know how much pride you take in your spotless corporate reputation." I stared at him, my expression unreadable. He had no idea that Apex Holdings was a private equity firm that I owned and operated as the CEO. He thought I was just a disposable number cruncher in a cubicle, terrified of middle management. "If you walk out of this elevator without signing that loan," Richard threatened, his voice dropping to a vicious, venomous whisper, "I will ruin you. I will pick up my phone tomorrow morning, and I will call the senior partners at Apex. I will tell them that you are involved in Trey's fraudulent crypto scheme. I will tell them you helped him launder the money. I will file a formal complaint accusing you of elder financial abuse, claiming you manipulated your own parents out of their retirement fund. You have absolutely no proof of any of that, I stated coldly, because it is a complete lie. It does not matter if it is a lie. He spat back a cruel, triumphant smile stretching across his face. In the corporate world, an accusation is all it takes. The moment I make that call, human resources will suspend you. They will launch an internal investigation. Your firm will panic and fire you just to avoid the scandal. I will drag your boring, pristine accountant name through the mud so thoroughly that you will be permanently blacklisted from every financial institution in Atlanta. You will never work in this city again. I looked at the man who had helped bring me into the world. There was no paternal instinct left in him. There was no love, no regret, no hesitation. I was looking at me the way a predator looks at a trapped animal. He was perfectly willing to annihilate my career, my reputation, and my entire livelihood just to secure a $200,000 loan for a son-in-law who had actively robbed him. You would destroy your own daughter to save a criminal, I said, stating it as a simple objective fact. You are not my daughter, Richard screamed, spittle flying from his lips. You are an investment that failed to pay off. We gave you everything. We provided a roof over your head for 18 years. We fed you. We clothed you. We paid for your braces and your school supplies. You cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars just to keep you alive. And what did I get in return? A stubborn, ungrateful brat who abandoned her family the second she got a paycheck. He reached out and violently grabbed the handle of my briefcase, trying to wrench it from my grip. I held on tight, my knuckles turning white. Open it, he demanded, his eyes wide with manic desperation. Take the contract out and sign it right now. Consider it retroactive payment for your existence. You owe us for every meal you ate under my roof. You owe us for the air you breathe. This signature is your final debt. You sign this loan, you save Trey from federal prison, and then you can disappear back into your pathetic, lonely life. The psychological abuse was absolute. It was the culmination of a lifetime of manipulation distilled into one claustrophobic moment inside a stalled service elevator. He was attempting to weaponize my very existence against me. He wanted me to believe that my life was a commodity that belonged to him, a debt that could only be settled by sacrificing my future on the altar of their greed. I let go of the briefcase handle so suddenly that Richard stumbled backward, clutching the leather bag to his chest. He looked surprised, thinking I had surrendered. He scrambled to open the brass locks, his hands shaking violently as he pulled out the stack of loan documents and the silver fountain pen I had placed inside. He slammed the paperwork against the steel wall of the elevator and clicked the pen open, holding it out to me. Sign it, he ordered, panting heavily. Sign it right now, Savannah. I looked at the pen, then at the documents, and finally at my father. The sheer pathetic nature of his threats washed over me. He thought he held the power to destroy my life with a single phone call to my firm. He had no idea that if he called Apex Holdings, my executive assistant would simply route the call directly to my personal cell phone. He had no idea that I held the master deed to his penthouse in that exact same briefcase. I reached out and took the pen from his shaking hand. I did not break eye contact with him. I pressed the silver nib against the signature line of the predatory loan agreement. I did not sign my name. I pressed hard, dragging the ink in a thick, dark line straight through the signature block, crossing out the entire section with a single aggressive strike. I pulled the pen away, capped it, and slipped it back into my jacket pocket. "What are you doing?" Richard gasped, staring at the ruined document in absolute horror. "I am rejecting your terms," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, terrifying authority that he had never heard before. "Go ahead and make your phone calls, Richard. Call the partners at Apex Holdings. Call the district attorney. Call the building management. Tell them whatever lies you want. But hear me clearly. You will never see a single dime of my money, and I will never lift a finger to save you from the hell you created for yourselves." I reached past him, grabbed the emergency override button, and pulled it hard. The elevator violently lurched back to life. The digital display blinked, and the cab began its rapid descent toward the underground garage. Richard was frozen, clutching the defaced contract, completely paralyzed by the realization that his ultimate threat had completely failed. His weapon was useless, and his target had just become untouchable. The digital display ticked down to the 20th floor. I watched my father's face contort from shock into an absolute unhinged madness. His hand shook wildly as he reached into his suit pocket and pulled out his cell phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. He was not bluffing anymore. He was entirely unpredictable. A trapped animal with nothing left to lose could still cause unnecessary logistical headaches. If he started making wild accusations to the police tonight, it would delay the legal eviction proceedings I had carefully scheduled. I needed them completely docile. I needed them to wait peacefully in their penthouse, confident and arrogant, until the executioner arrived. I needed a tactical retreat. I slammed my hand onto the emergency stop button for the second time. The elevator jerked to a violent halt. In a fraction of a second, I executed a total psychological shift. I immediately dropped my commanding posture. The icy corporate authority vanished from my shoulders. I let my spine curve inward, making myself physically smaller and noticeably vulnerable. I rapidly increased my breathing, forcing my chest to heave in shallow, erratic gasps. I dug my fingernails viciously into the palms of my hands, using the sharp physical pain to force a rush of hot, authentic-looking tears into my eyes. "Wait!" I gasped, my voice trembling with perfectly manufactured terror. "Dad, please wait. Put the phone down. Do not call my firm." Richard froze. His thumb stopped inches from the illuminated screen. He looked up, his furious expression faltering as he took in the sight of me. My shoulders were shaking. Tears were spilling over my eyelashes and rolling down my cheeks. The impenetrable armor I had worn all evening was completely gone, replaced by the exact image of the weak, easily intimidated girl they had thrown out 5 years ago. I knew it. Richard spat, his chest puffing out instantly. He lowered the phone, a cruel, triumphant smirk, replacing his panic. "You always talk a big game, Savannah, but you are nothing but a coward. You break the second someone pushes back." "I am sorry," I sobbed, wrapping my arms around my stomach and sinking slightly against the steel wall of the elevator. I panicked. The interest rate on that paperwork terrified me. If I sign that right now, without paying the upfront origination fees, they will initiate an immediate default on Monday. I want to help Trey, I really do, but I cannot do it tonight. Richard stepped closer, entirely drunk on his perceived power. He loved this. He loved seeing me reduced to a crying, trembling mess. He truly believed his threat to call my employers had shattered my resolve. "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded, waving the defaced contract in my face. "It is a signature, Savannah. You sign it and the money gets wired." "That is not how predatory lenders work," I stammered, wiping a fake tear from my chin. "I know these firms. I audit them. If I submit this application over the weekend with zero down payment, their automated system will flag it as high risk and reject Trey entirely. To push a $200,000 approval through their underwriting department, I need to provide a cash deposit to cover the processing fees and the first month of interest. It will be at least $10,000. I do not have that kind of money sitting in my checking account at midnight on a Friday." Richard narrowed his eyes, his greed calculating the logistics of my lie. "Are you telling me you cannot even scrape together 10 grand? What kind of useless accountant are you?" "I live paycheck to paycheck," I lied smoothly, letting a pathetic sob escape my throat. "I have a tiny savings account at a local credit union. It has just enough to cover the fees, but they do not do online transfers for amounts over 5,000. I have to go to the physical branch in person. I need exactly 3 days, Dad. Please, let me go to the bank on Monday morning when they open at 8 o'clock. I will liquidate my entire savings account. I will bring the cash and a freshly printed copy of this exact contract directly to the management office by 9 o'clock. I swear to you, I will sign it then, and Trey will have his money by Monday afternoon." My father stared at my tear-stained face. His massive ego completely blinded him to the trap I was setting. He did not see a brilliant CEO orchestrating his downfall. He saw a broken, defeated daughter begging for mercy. He felt absolute superiority. He pulled the emergency release button. The elevator resumed its descent toward the garage. "Come with me," he ordered. "You are going to explain your pathetic financial situation to your mother and Trey." When the doors opened to the underground parking level, Patricia, Brittany, and Trey were already there. They had taken the main passenger elevator down, determined to intercept me before I could drive away. They surrounded the service cab immediately. "She ruined the contract," Richard announced to them, holding up the crossed-out page. "But she broke. She is terrified of losing her little cubicle job." Patricia looked at my crying face and let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Look at you," she sneered, stepping forward to examine my fake tears like a museum exhibit. "You look absolutely pathetic, Savannah. You come up to our penthouse acting like you are better than us in your cheap canvas pants, and now you are blubbering like a child." I kept my head down, staring at the concrete floor, playing the role of the humiliated victim flawlessly. I repeated my fabricated story, my voice shaking with perfectly timed hiccups. I told them about the origination fees. I told them about my tiny restricted savings account. I begged them for 72 hours to gather the cash required to secure Trey's freedom. Trey crossed his arms, puffing his chest out in the damp garage air. "I told you she was useless," Trey mocked, looking at Brittany. "She cannot even secure a simple bridge loan without needing a weekend to count her pennies. But fine. If she needs 3 days to empty her piggy bank, let her do it." Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, Savannah. "You bring the cash and you sign the new paperwork, or your career is entirely over." Brittany scoffed, turning her back on me in disgust. "Do not be late. We have a busy schedule on Monday, and I do not want to spend my morning dealing with your incompetence." I nodded meekly, wiping my nose with the back of my hand. "I understand," I whispered, sounding utterly defeated. "Monday at 9. I will not fail you again." "Get out of our sight," Patricia commanded, waving her hand dismissively. "Go back to your miserable apartment and start counting your loose change." I turned away from them, keeping my shoulders slumped and my head bowed. I walked slowly toward my unmarked sedan, listening to their cruel laughter echoing off the concrete pillars of the parking garage. They were celebrating their absolute victory. They firmly believed they had successfully terrorized me into liquidating my own assets to fund their fraudulent lifestyle. They were completely drunk on relief. I unlocked my car, pulled the heavy door open, and slid into the driver's seat. I shut the door, sealing myself inside the soundproof cabin. The instant the door clicked shut, my tears stopped entirely. My breathing leveled out into a slow, predatory rhythm. My spine snapped back into perfect, rigid alignment. I looked through the tinted glass of my rearview mirror and watched my toxic family walking back toward the elevators, patting each other on the back, completely oblivious to the reality of the situation. I reached over and patted the leather briefcase sitting on the passenger seat. The master deed was safe inside. I had successfully bought the weekend. The board was perfectly set. I started the engine, a cold, lethal smile spreading across my face as I pulled out of the garage. "Enjoy your final weekend of luxury," I whispered to the empty car. "Because Monday morning is going to be spectacular." The tires of my unmarked sedan gripped the concrete ramp as I accelerated out of the underground parking garage and merged onto the neon-lit streets of downtown Atlanta. The oppressive humidity of the summer night hit the windshield, but inside the climate-controlled cabin of my car, the air was absolute ice. The adrenaline of my performance had completely faded, leaving behind a state of pure, hyper-focused clarity. I reached up and tapped the digital display on my dashboard, instantly connecting my secure phone line to the Bluetooth audio system. I did not have a single second to waste. The 72-hour window I had just manipulated my family into granting me was not a grace period for them. It was a countdown to their total annihilation. I tapped the speed dial for Victoria, my director of legal affairs. She answered on the very first ring, despite it being well past midnight on a Friday. "Tell me the acquisition transfer is fully complete," I commanded, keeping my eyes fixed on the taillights of the traffic ahead of me. "It is sealed and recorded with the county clerk," Victoria replied, her voice crisp and professional through the car speakers. "Blackwood Ventures has officially been dissolved. The master deed for the Pinnacle is now entirely registered under your legal name, Savannah. You have absolute ownership and total operational control of the entire property." "Excellent," I said, taking a sharp turn onto the interstate. "Now we initiate the purge. I need you to draft 2 emergency eviction notices tonight. Target both penthouses on the 40th floor. The current tenants are Richard and Patricia Evans and Trey and Brittany Sterling, or whatever shell company Trey used to sign his lease. I want them both named directly on the paperwork." "Understood," Victoria said, the sound of her typing rapidly echoing over the line. "Standard 30-day notice for non-payment of rent." "Absolutely not," I countered, my voice hardening. They are 4 months in arrears, and Trey is actively under investigation by federal regulators for massive financial fraud. That triggers the criminal activity clause in the Pinnacle lease agreement. I want 0-day emergency eviction notices. I want the paperwork formatted to demand immediate unconditional vacation of the premises by 9 o'clock Monday morning. Make sure my name is printed at the top of the letterhead in bold ink. I want them to look down at the eviction order and realize exactly who is throwing them out into the street. I will have the documents drafted and finalized within the hour, Victoria confirmed. I will send them via encrypted courier to the management office first thing tomorrow morning. Do not send them tomorrow, I corrected her. Hold them in your secure physical possession until Monday morning. I am going to hand deliver them myself. I ended the call and immediately tapped the next number on my screen. The line rang twice before a hesitant, tired voice answered. It was Mr. Sterling, the general manager of the Pinnacle. This is Sterling, he answered, clearly annoyed by the late-night interruption. Who is calling on this restricted line? Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice projecting absolute corporate dominance. This is Savannah. We had a brief unpleasant encounter in your lobby 2 days ago when a resident named Trey threw a $20 bill at my feet. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Ms. Savannah, he stammered, instantly flustered. I am so terribly sorry about that incident. I assure you that kind of behavior is not tolerated here. I was actually preparing to issue a formal warning to Mr. Evans. Do not bother with the warning, I interrupted smoothly. And do not apologize to me. I am not calling to complain about a resident. I am calling to introduce myself formally. As of this evening, my private equity firm has finalized the purchase of Crestview Financial's distressed debt portfolio. I am the new legal owner of the Pinnacle. The silence on the line was absolute. I could practically hear the color draining from the general manager's face as his brain struggled to process the information. The woman in the cheap canvas work pants who had just been publicly humiliated in his lobby was now his ultimate boss. Ma'am, Sterling finally choked out his voice, dropping an entire octave in pure terror. I had absolutely no idea. If I had known you were inspecting the property, I would have rolled out the red carpet. Please tell me my job is secure. Your job is entirely secure. Mr. Sterling, provided you follow my next instructions with absolute precision, I told him, taking the exit toward my luxury high-rise in Midtown. On Monday morning at exactly 8:45, I want you to clear the main lobby of all non-essential personnel. I want the main bank of passenger elevators locked down and restricted to my exclusive use. Furthermore, I want you to retain 4 of your largest, most aggressive private security contractors and have them waiting for me at the front desk. We are going to conduct a forced removal on the 40th floor. Yes, absolutely, ma'am, Sterling agreed frantically. I will have the security team fully briefed and waiting for your arrival. The lobby will be completely locked down. I severed the connection. The civil trap was completely set. My parents and my sister were going to lose their home, their status, and their fake billionaire lifestyle all at once. But civil ruin was not enough. They had demanded I sign a predatory loan to save a criminal. I needed to make sure Trey never saw the outside of a federal penitentiary for the rest of his natural life. I tapped the final number on my dashboard display. It was Marcus, my lead corporate investigator. He had spent the last 3 weeks digging through the digital graveyard of Trey's fraudulent investment fund. You are working late, boss. Marcus answered, his voice gravelly and wide awake. The timeline just accelerated, I told him, pulling my sedan into the secure parking garage of my own building. I need the final dossier on Trey. Do you have the unredacted files? I have everything, Marcus confirmed with a predatory chuckle. The offshore routing numbers, the forged escrow accounts, and the digital footprints showing exactly how he drained his in-law's retirement fund to pay off his underground creditors. The guy is an absolute amateur. He left a trail a mile wide. Package the entire file, I ordered, shifting my car into park and turning off the headlights. I want you to forward the complete dossier directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the Atlanta Police Department. Copy the regional director of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Done, Marcus said. The police are going to have an absolute field day with this. When do you want me to hit send? Send it on Sunday night at 11 p.m., I instructed, stepping out of my car into the quiet, echoing garage. I want the file sitting at the absolute top of the detective's inbox when he sits down at his desk on Monday morning. I want the arrest warrants expedited. By the time I finish evicting them from the penthouse, I want the police cruisers waiting at the curb to take Trey away in handcuffs. Understood, boss. The payload will drop exactly on schedule. I hung up the phone and walked toward the private elevator that led to my real home. My high-rise was quiet, elegant, and fully paid for with clean, hard-earned corporate capital. I stepped inside the elevator and pressed the button for my floor. My breathing was perfectly even. My heart rate was steady. Every single variable had been calculated. Every single escape route had been permanently sealed off. My family was currently sitting in their ruined penthouse, celebrating their false victory, fully believing they had manipulated me into saving their lives. They had absolutely no idea that they were simply holding their breath underwater. The weekend would pass, Monday would arrive, and the entire world they built on lies and stolen money would violently shatter into a million pieces. Monday morning arrived with a blinding harsh sunlight that cut through the glass walls of the Pinnacle VIP lobby. At exactly 8:45, I walked through the revolving front doors, my steel-toed work boots replaced by a pair of sharp black designer heels. I carried my leather briefcase in my right hand. The sprawling marble lobby was unusually quiet. Following my strict orders, Mr. Sterling had cleared the space of all non-essential staff and lingering residents. The only people present were four towering private security contractors standing perfectly still near the concierge desk, and my toxic family, who were lounging on the plush velvet sofas in the exact center of the room. They had completely regained their arrogant swagger. The terrified, desperate people I had left sobbing in the stalled service elevator on Friday night were entirely gone. In their place sat four delusional narcissists who firmly believed they had successfully bent reality to their will. Trey was back in his element. He was wearing a fresh, impeccably tailored navy designer suit, his hair slicked back with expensive pomade. He leaned against the back of the sofa, projecting the untouchable aura of a visionary tech billionaire, completely ignoring the fact that his bank accounts were frozen and federal regulators were currently hunting him. Brittany sat right next to him, wearing a massive pair of designer sunglasses indoors and holding an empty crystal champagne flute. My parents sat opposite them looking like a king and queen, waiting for a lowly peasant to bring them their daily tribute. Patricia spotted me walking across the polished marble floor. She immediately rolled her eyes and aggressively tapped the face of her luxury watch. "You are late, Savannah," she snapped, her voice echoing harshly in the vast empty lobby. "We said 9 o'clock sharp. It is almost 9 and Trey has a highly sensitive conference call with his new offshore investors in 20 minutes. Do not waste our time." I stopped directly in front of the glass coffee table looking down at them. "You are early," I noted, keeping my expression entirely blank and my posture rigidly straight. "We wanted to get this tedious chore over with," Richard said, leaning forward with a heavy sigh. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out the thick stack of predatory loan documents. He slammed them onto the glass table, smoothing out the wrinkled front page. He then pulled out a cheap plastic promotional pen and tossed it onto the paper. It bounced twice before rolling to a stop. "You brought the cash for the origination fees, I assume," Trey stated, not even bothering to look at me. He was busy inspecting his manicured fingernails, thoroughly enjoying his perceived superiority. "Hand the $10,000 to your father, Savannah. Then sign the bottom line on page 7 and initial every single addendum. And do it quickly. The wire transfer needs to be initiated before the major banks open on the West Coast." They truly believed they had won. They looked at me as if I was nothing more than a disposable automated teller machine, a pathetic creature who had spent the entire weekend desperately scraping together pennies just to secure their financial survival. They were eagerly waiting for me to sign away my entire future, completely ready to seal my absolute financial ruin so they could maintain their pathetic illusion of wealth. I looked at the cheap plastic pen resting on the predatory contract, and then I tightened my grip on the handle of my leather briefcase. Brittany let out a loud, theatrical sigh of absolute exasperation. She pulled her designer sunglasses down the bridge of her nose, glaring at me over the dark rims. "What exactly is the holdup, Savannah?" She sneered, her voice dripping with venomous entitlement. "Are you waiting for a written invitation? Sign the paper and hand over the cash. We have incredibly important people to meet today, and we cannot spend our entire morning babysitting a low-level accountant. I shifted my gaze from the table to my sister. Who exactly are you meeting? I asked, my tone perfectly flat. Brittany scoffed, adjusting her posture on the velvet sofa to look even more arrogant. If you must know, there is a massive rumor floating around the country club. The Pinnacle was just acquired in a blind auction on Friday. Some anonymous billionaire bought the entire complex for cash. The old management company is completely out. Trey and I are setting up a private meeting with the new owner this afternoon. Trey nodded enthusiastically, completely buying into his own fabricated reality. Exactly, he bragged, aggressively adjusting his expensive silk tie. These corporate whales respect visionary entrepreneurs like me. As soon as your little loan clears and gives my fund the temporary liquidity it needs, I am going to sit down with this anonymous billionaire. I am going to charm them, pitch them on my next offshore crypto project, and then I am going to make an aggressive cash offer to buy both of these penthouses outright. We are done renting Savannah. We are moving into absolute ownership. The sheer delusion was staggering. They were facing criminal fraud charges and an emergency eviction, yet they honestly believed they were going to leverage a predatory loan to buy $50 million worth of real estate by charming a phantom billionaire. Brittany let out a high-pitched, cruel laugh, clapping her hands together as if she had just thought of a brilliant joke. It is honestly pathetic how much you are struggling right now, Savannah. But do not worry. Because we are family, I will make sure you get a little piece of our new empire. Once we officially buy the 40th floor, maybe I will hire you. My new imported marble toilets are going to need scrubbing twice a week, and you clearly have the exact right wardrobe for the job. She gestured mockingly at my black designer heels, completely oblivious to the fact that my shoes cost more than her entire ruined bank account. Now be a good little servant, Brittany commanded, kicking the leg of the glass coffee table with her foot. Pick up the pen, sign away your boring little life, and give us our money. I looked at Brittany's smug face. Then I looked at Trey, who was grinning like a victorious king. I looked at my parents, who were nodding in total agreement with the ultimate insult. They had handed me the absolute perfect catalyst. I set my leather briefcase flat on the glass coffee table right on top of their predatory loan. I completely ignored the cheap plastic pen resting on the glass. I did not reach for my checkbook. I did not apologize or cower or shed a single fabricated tear. Instead, my hands moved with deliberate, lethal precision. I popped the heavy gold clasps of my designer leather briefcase. The sharp metallic clicks echoed like gunshots in the massive, silent lobby. My family leaned forward, their eyes wide with greedy anticipation. They were fully expecting me to pull out banded stacks of hard currency to fund their delusions. I reached inside the briefcase. I bypassed the empty compartments and wrapped my fingers around a thick, heavy stack of government-stamped, legally bound documents. I pulled the massive file out and held it suspended over their predatory contract for just a fraction of a second. Then I slammed the official property deed onto the center of the glass table. The impact landed with a deafening, violent crack. The force rattled the glass surface so hard that Brittany dropped her empty crystal champagne flute. It shattered instantly across the polished marble floor, but nobody even looked at the broken glass. "What is this garbage?" Richard demanded, flinching back from the table. "I told you to bring cash, Savannah. This is not cash." I kept my hands resting flat on the heavy parchment paper. I locked eyes with my father, letting the absolute crushing weight of my true identity radiate outward. I stripped away every single trace of the weak, intimidated girl they thought they knew. "You always said I could not afford a house," I stated. My voice was a weapon cutting through the stagnant air of the lobby with perfect icy enunciation. "You were right. I did not buy a house. I bought the entire building." Patricia gasped, clapping her hands over her mouth. Trey shot forward on the velvet sofa, his arrogant smirk vanishing entirely. I reached across the table and flipped the heavy cover page over, exposing the official county registrar seals and the embossed stamps of the state government. I pointed my index finger directly at the bottom right corner of the document, tapping the thick black ink violently. "Read it," I commanded, staring directly at Trey. "Read the signature line." Trey stared at the paper. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. His eyes darted back and forth across the legal text, his brain desperately trying to reject the impossible reality staring back at him. His jaw went completely slack. "Read it out loud," I snapped, projecting the full terrifying authority of a corporate titan. Trey swallowed hard, his vocal cords barely working. His hands began to shake wildly. "Savannah," he whispered, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Chief Executive Officer of Apex Holdings, sole owner of the Pinnacle." The silence that followed was suffocating. The delusional, arrogant universe they had constructed completely collapsed in a single heartbeat. The anonymous billionaire they had just bragged about charming the ultimate power broker they planned to beg for a new home was the exact same woman they had just ordered to scrub their toilets. The trap had officially slammed shut, and they were finally looking at the executioner. The heavy silence in the lobby was absolute and suffocating. I watched the arrogant billionaire persona melt off Trey, like cheap wax too close to a flame. His skin turned the color of ash. He stared blindly at my signature on the master deed, his lips parting, but producing absolutely no sound. The devastating reality of the document completely short-circuited his brain. Beside him, Patricia began to violently tremble. Her eyes darted wildly from the deed to my face, her mind desperately trying to rewrite the narrative. Her maternal instincts, completely absent for the last 5 years, suddenly attempted to resurrect themselves. She reached a shaking hand across the glass table toward me. "Savannah," Patricia stammered, her voice a fragile, pathetic squeak. "Sweetheart, I do not understand. You own this building. We are your family. We just wanted to push you to succeed. This whole loan thing was just a test. We knew you were doing well." I slapped her hand away from the table. The sharp crack echoed through the massive room, instantly silencing her pathetic attempt to pivot. Richard did not even look at me. He was completely paralyzed, staring at the government seals on the parchment paper. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. He had spent his entire life viewing me as a worthless scapegoat, and now the undeniable proof of my empire was sitting right in front of him, crushing his ego into dust. Brittany finally snapped out of her shock. She pointed a trembling, perfectly manicured finger at me. "This is fraud," she shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the marble walls. "This is a fake document. You are an accountant. You cannot afford a $50 million high-rise. You forged this to scare us." Before I could verbally destroy my sister's final desperate delusion, the massive glass doors of the front entrance swung open with a heavy mechanical groan. The timing was completely flawless. 4 of my private security contractors dressed in tactical black suits marched into the lobby. They formed a rigid, impenetrable wall immediately behind my family, cutting off their only avenue of escape. But they were not the main event. Right behind them walked 3 plainclothes detectives from the Financial Crimes Division of the Atlanta Police Department, their heavy tactical vests loudly displaying the letters APD in bright yellow print. Their hands rested easily on the grips of their holstered weapons. The lead detective, a massive man with a graying beard, completely ignored the rest of my family and marched directly toward the velvet sofa. Trey Sterling, the lead detective, barked his voice, carrying the absolute authority of the federal government. Trey flinched violently, his eyes going wide with pure animal terror. He tried to stand up, but his legs completely gave out, sending him crashing heavily back onto the sofa cushions. "Stand up and place your hands behind your back," the detective ordered, pulling a thick folded piece of paper from his tactical vest. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest, signed by a federal judge at 6 o'clock this morning. You are being charged with 8 counts of wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and international money laundering." The executioner had not just arrived. He had brought the entire federal government with him. "No, wait," Trey stammered, scrambling backward on the plush velvet cushions like a cornered rat. "You have the wrong guy. My fund is completely legitimate. This is a massive misunderstanding." The lead detective did not even blink. He reached forward, grabbed Trey by the lapels of his expensive designer suit, and hauled him entirely off the sofa. Trey thrashed wildly, his heavy leather shoes slipping on the polished marble floor, but he was completely outmatched. The detective spun him around, slammed him face first against the glass coffee table, and violently yanked his arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of the heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed loudly through the massive lobby. Brittany finally realized what was happening. Her fake billionaire lifestyle was evaporating right in front of her eyes. She lunged forward, her hands raised in a hysterical panic. "Let him go!" Brittany shrieked, clawing at the empty air. "He is a visionary. You cannot arrest him. Do you know who we are?" The second detective stepped directly into her path, holding up a massive, calloused hand. "Step back immediately, or you will be charged with assaulting a federal officer and obstruction of justice." The detective warned, his voice low and incredibly dangerous. Brittany froze, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. She looked at Trey, who was now weeping openly. His face pressed painfully against the glass table, completely shattering his untouchable aura. The detectives hauled Trey to his feet. He dragged his expensive Italian shoes across the floor, completely broken, sobbing hysterically as the federal agents marched him toward the heavy glass exit doors. I watched his pathetic, retreating figure until the police cruisers outside flashed their red and blue lights, sealing his fate forever. The heavy glass doors swung shut, sealing the deafening silence back inside the lobby. I slowly turned my attention back to the velvet sofa. My father, my mother, and my sister were completely frozen in place. Their anchor was permanently gone. Their criminal automated teller machine was sitting in the back of a federal squad car. They were completely exposed. I reached back into my leather designer briefcase. I bypassed the master deed and pulled out a crisp white manila envelope. I opened the flap and pulled out 3 legally binding court-ordered documents printed on heavy cardstock. I placed them flat on the glass coffee table directly over the spot where Trey had just been pinned. "These are 0-day emergency eviction notices," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute freezing authority. "They are legally enforced and fully active as of this exact moment. You are currently trespassing on my private property." Richard stared blankly at the bold black letters at the top of the page. He could not comprehend the words. "Eviction," he mumbled, his voice completely hollow. "Savannah, we live here. We have a signed lease." "Your lease was invalidated the moment Trey committed federal fraud from the premises," I corrected him sharply, tapping my index finger against the criminal activity clause highlighted in bright yellow ink. "And even if he had not, you are 4 months in arrears. You have no money. You have no status. You have absolutely nothing." I looked at my luxury wristwatch. The polished hands ticked with lethal precision. "It is exactly 9:15 in the morning. I am authorizing my private security team to escort you up to the 40th floor. You have exactly 2 hours to gather your personal belongings. At 11:15, anything left in those penthouses legally becomes my property, and you will be physically thrown out of the building." Patricia shattered completely. The icy, arrogant matriarch who had spent my entire life tearing down my self-esteem dissolved into a puddle of absolute desperation. She fell to her knees on the marble floor, completely ruining her expensive tailored slacks. "Savannah, please," Patricia sobbed, reaching out and wrapping her trembling hands around my ankles. "You cannot do this to us. We are your parents. We gave you life. You have a massive empire now. You do not need this building. Just let us stay in the penthouse. We will be quiet. We will never bother you again. I swear it on my life." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no regret, just total cleansing closure. "You did not give me a life," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You gave me an endless cycle of psychological abuse. You treated me like a disposable servant while you worshipped a criminal. You threw me out into the cold because I refused to be a pawn in your delusional game of status." Brittany dropped to her knees right next to our mother, her designer sunglasses falling off her face and clattering onto the floor. "Savannah, I am so sorry," Brittany wailed, her voice cracking with sheer panic. "I was jealous of you. I was always jealous of how smart you were. Trey was a monster. He forced me to act like that. Please, I have nowhere to go. My bank accounts are frozen. The federal government took my credit cards. I have 0 cash. I will do anything. I will scrub your toilets. I meant it. Please give me a job." I stared at my sister, watching her heavy makeup run down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. "You do not have the skills to scrub my toilets, Brittany," I told her coldly. Richard remained on the sofa, clutching his chest, his breathing entirely erratic. He looked at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. "We are going to be completely homeless," Richard whispered, the reality finally breaking through his massive ego. You are condemning your own flesh and blood to the absolute gutter. Where are we supposed to go? I reached down and grabbed my mother by the shoulders, physically prying her hands off my ankles. I stepped back, creating a permanent physical barrier between my empire and their toxic wasteland. I looked at the three of them, perfectly memorizing the image of their total destruction. I leaned forward slightly, projecting my voice so it would echo in their minds for the rest of their miserable lives. Go live in the streets, I stated with absolute lethal finality. I turned my back on them and walked toward my private secure elevator. I did not look back when they started screaming. I did not look back when my towering security guards physically dragged them toward the service elevator to monitor their 2-hour packing window. I simply stepped into the cab, pressed the button for the absolute top floor, and left them to their ruin. 2 hours later, the summer sky over Atlanta cracked open. A massive, violent thunderstorm rolled off the mountains, plunging the city into a dark, freezing downpour. Lightning flashed across the skyline, illuminating the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my newly acquired penthouse. The space was completely silent, smelling faintly of expensive cedar and total victory. I stood perfectly still by the reinforced glass, holding a delicate crystal glass of rare vintage red wine. I took a slow, deep sip, letting the rich, complex flavors coat my tongue as I looked down at the streets 40 stories below. Through the blinding sheets of rain, I watched the heavy front doors of the Pinnacle swing open. My security team stood firm under the massive awning blocking the entrance. Three tiny, pathetic figures stumbled out onto the flooded pavement. My father, my mother, and my sister were completely soaked within seconds. They were not carrying designer luggage. They were dragging cheap, heavy black trash bags filled with whatever random clothes they could stuff inside before the clock ran out. They slipped and stumbled on the wet concrete, arguing violently with each other as the freezing rain plastered their clothes to their bodies. They had absolutely nowhere to go. No money, no status, no shelter. The golden child was sitting in a federal holding cell, and the scapegoat was watching them from the throne of the empire they had tried to steal. I raised my crystal glass in a silent, solitary toast to the pouring rain. The Evans family legacy was officially washed away into the gutters of the city. My name was Savannah. I was the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings and the permanent owner of the Pinnacle. I took one final sip of my wine, turned my back to the window, and walked into my perfectly peaceful, perfectly quiet home.